I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like what 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to what we are going to call episode 317 of the Buck Around, because we just finished recording an episode with Colin Morissette from USCFootball.com. That will be 316, but we haven't said this introduction part yet. This is more than you want to know, but I'm just still talking, and it's one big long run-on sentence. I am Richard Branch, one half of the Buck Around, and I am joined by my multitasking colleague, Maxwell Brusky. Max, how's that file opening going over there?
File opening's going fine. All my filters are still there, and I just have to add a conditional formatting.
Oh boy, more Excel for people. They're going to be
I love it.
excited today.
Well, I'm not doing pivot tables or VLOOKUP, so I'm just doing this.
Well, before we start, we have a major announcement to make. You know what that is?
Major announcement?
Yes. We have done something for the first time. It's taken us, if you follow us on the Twitters, you already know this, but we've done something it's taken us only, I think, 12 years to do. We have a YouTube channel.
Yes.
Because apparently there are some sickos out there who like listening to podcasts through YouTube, like I guess in the background. That's what they do. They don't even watch the video. So apparently we're supposed to put our podcast on YouTube, and we have done that. So from now on, every show, I'm going to be just yelling about liking and subscribing and smashing that like button and hit the notifications or whatever else the YouTube people say, all those things I've heard. And we need to start a Twitter beef, or no, a YouTube beef. Like we need to do one of those things, and like go to that haunted house where they filmed The Shining and get in a fight with Brent Rivera, like those things. I know all these things. I've learned things from having two teenagers in my house. Like,
oh my gosh,
I know all the brain rot. If you want to know YouTube brain rot, I know all about it.
You're pretty good. Like half the people I listen to are when the topic of YouTube comes in, it's how they've been banned and how their channel's been demonetized. Right?
Oh no! So
or they're on their third one because the first two got nuked.
So we're on the YouTubes now. I think it's youtube.com/buckaroundpodcast or something like that. But don't take me at my word. Just go to buckaroundpodcast.com, and then on the bottom you'll see the little YouTube icon. You can click there, and that'll take you to our YouTube channel, if that's your preferred method of show consumption. And we have to give our friends Sean and Madison the award for getting the first comment on any of our videos ever. So I uploaded a little bit of back catalog, basically going back to, I don't know what it was going back to. I think it was the in-state recruiting stuff. So maybe around episode 305, 307. So there's a few episodes up there that for some reason they went up out of order because of the way YouTube imported them. But
yeah,
you're all grown-ups. You can handle it. Well, theoretically.
But Rich, what's the video content like on the YouTube? I think you need to clarify. In
the words of my wife, horrifying.
Was it video? It's not video.
No, it's a still image. We have no video component because if you didn't know this already, we cut these shows up. Hence why we have our fantastic editor, Cody. We have no presumption that when we talk for 55 minutes, all 55 minutes need to be listened to. They generally end up at, 48. And that makes the experience for you as a listener better. But in a video format, that would be very jarring because it would just be a lot of jump cuts of dead air and things like that. And we're not putting up raw stuff. So it is just the audio feed. So it's great to have in the background if you need it. But if you're looking for something different, don't get excited. There is a still image, which is a caricature of you and me, Max, and the Buck Around logo that my wife said I do look like a psycho, or horrifying, actually, was the word. So there's that.
I thought you said that, not her.
No, she said that.
Oh my
And
God. My wife just had a big giggle.
yeah, well, that was sort of the way it was said. I don't think it was truly horrifying. It was more like, what are you guys doing? And I was like, we're not putting any more effort into this. I've spent too much time on it already. It'll do its job. So
there was that, but I couldn't. There were two things I couldn't get out of my head when I first saw it. The first one was the, what's his name? Zelensky Auto Parts, Dan Aykroyd in Tommy Boy.
Okay.
And his like logo thing where it's this caricature of Dan Aykroyd. He's this big head in this little car.
That's about what it kind of has that vibe.
Yeah. It's totally that vibe. And then the other thing was, hey man, go to a steakhouse. It's a lot of caricatures sometimes.
Yes, there are.
That was the other thing I was thinking of.
But I don't think anyone would have our picture on the wall with a steakhouse.
Not yet.
All right.
Not yet.
That's like 6 minutes of show, housekeeping here right at the top, which is not bringing in the new listeners, but we apologize. Big day for us. So
housekeeping.
Give us a little break. So to segue into the show here, had a lot of feedback from episode 315, which will be 2 episodes ago when you hear this. Really positive feedback. People really liked, apparently, our fourth down discussion. It was even brought to my attention that we were a topic of discussion on the message boards, which is probably a terrible thing. But
it depends on the message board.
I'm not gonna look at. I don't even know what it is, and I'm not gonna look.
I'm not either, but good or bad, it depends a lot on which message board this is.
You know what? No publicity is bad publicity, right? I guess that's what it is. But anyways, I'm glad that people, in all seriousness, people found it engaging. And one thing that a certain host of this show brought up as we were going through this exercise was the team that's always first in his heart and on top of his mind at all times, which is the University of Iowa. And you said, let's talk about Kirk Ferentz, because I want to see Kirk Ferentz against Paul Chryst. So
well, it's not just the fact that it's Iowa, it's Iowa, but yes, it's like isn't Iowa and Ferentz like the gold standard of conservatism? Hunting is winning, it's like there's nobody else that anybody would think of in the country when you think of not going for it on fourth down.
Yes.
I mean, and last 2 years, yeah, fine, you have the best punter in the land, but even if they have an okay punter, it's still the same thing.
Right.
When the receiving punts, nobody's allowed to return it unless it's Cooper DeJean. Like that's the first time that's ever happened where somebody's got the green light ever.
Right.
So I thought the data was pretty fascinating.
I thought it, for the most part, just kind of confirmed what we thought. So how do we want to do this? I wrote down my little numbers on the agenda. I know you have a bunch of stuff. I basically mirrored my exercise that I did with Fickle and Chryst with Ferentz.
I don't have a whole lot except like my overarching thing would be when you look at the data and you see the drive result, there's a lot of touchdowns on there, and it's way more than the Wisconsin data.
Oh, when they go, you mean?
Yeah. Like the result of the drive on a drive where they went for it, where they had a fourth down conversion or a fourth down attempt, right? Even a fourth down attempt, excuse me. I think that speaks to like it works, like the approach works. If you say if you're going to get touchdowns on most of the times you go for it, it says what you're doing is working. It doesn't say how many more touchdowns you would have, right?
Right.
If your go rate was a little higher, but it does say when they do it, it usually works out well. And some of the stuff that's on there too. I mean, there's a couple
Mm-hmm.
fumbles on there, which are interesting, and that, how you kind of throw that out, I think. And then so many of these are end of game, end of half. Like it's either success or no impact.
Or kneeling out. I mean,
yeah. Which tells me that's what they're doing is working.
So, yeah, it was interesting to me because I was really not even going at it from a perspective of value, like, is it the right or wrong? I was more just like, all right, let's just, again, it was sort of like that go, no go decision that the model has. I don't care if it's right or not. I'm just curious to use it as a barometer of comparison.
Yeah.
So I used a lot of the same criteria we used in 315 and ran them with Ferentz. And a lot of them came up exactly as I thought. So first, I just did the go rate, like how often, what percentage of the time he went on fourth down, irrespective of context. And again, limits to that. But again, just to sort of do the same exercise I did in 315 and just see what it told me. And we did this since 2015, so we're mirroring the time. The one thing I thought that was number one interesting, he has significantly more fourth downs in that period of time than Fickle or Christ. He has 991 fourth downs. With an offense that's not running a lot of plays, right? This is not a high-tempo offense. So it kind of, that stereotype of the Iowa offense does fit to a certain degree. I mean, last year's offense had the most fourth downs of any of his teams. You know, the Deacon Hill Express had 135 fourth downs, which was the most of, I think, any of these teams in any season, which in a slow offense...
That checks out,
tells you, it tells you what you think. So his career go rate was 16%. It's actually 15.5, but again, let's not worry about decimals. His highest go rate, and you're going to help me remember which offenses these were, was 24% in 2018, which was, who was the quarterback for that one?
That would have been year 3 of Nate Stanley.
Okay, so it's a Nate Stanley offense. Okay.
Definitely a Nate Stanley, and with decent running backs.
And his lowest go rate was this past year.
Wait a minute. I'm trying to think, because I think 2018 might have been the year when they had both Noah Fant and TJ Hawkinson.
Okay. That feels like too long ago, but not important. Okay. But it's a better offense.
Anyway.
It's one of the better offenses.
It's one of the better ones for sure.
Yeah. And then again, they only went for it 10% of the time this past season. That was his lowest. But 2022, they went for it 12% of the time. 2021, 12%. There's not a lot of variation. The big variation is 17, 18, and 19, because he went for it 20% of the time in 17, 24%, which we mentioned in 2018, and 19% in 2019. Otherwise, he's basically under 15%. All the other seasons.
Those are all Nate Stanleys.
Yeah. And then just to remind people, Christ's go rate over the same period of time was 19%, and Fickle's was 29%. So again, this is every fourth down they faced, irrespective of context. So, okay, Fickle goes for it more often. Chris goes for it slightly more often. Then did the go rate for this team when they were within 2 touchdowns. So the same thing I did in episode 315. So if they were losing by 14 points or less, or winning by 14 points or less, the idea being, of course, you're going to go for it if you're down 21 points, right? For the most part. Or of course, you're going to punt the ball when you're up 17 points in the fourth quarter, especially if you're Kirk Ferentz. Like, that's heaven. Like, let's eliminate those just so we're looking at a little bit more controlled group. And in that situation, so again, irrespective of where you are on the field, just looking at points, Ferentz went for it 13% of the time. So he actually drops a little bit from his overall number. His high was 21% in 2018, and his low, this is the one I love, was 4% last year. So what that meant was if he was down 14 points, which didn't really happen that much just because teams didn't score that much.
Well, that's because their defense was so freaking good.
Right. He would just punt and ride it out.
You had not only that, what was it, the second best defense in the country, or the bottom? Yeah. In the top 3. Okay. Not only that, you had Torrey Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And when you got the ball back, you had Cooper DeJean as returner.
Right. So theoretically,
you had like these 3 components. If they would have had an offense that was worth going for it more than 4%, who knows what would happen.
And just to put that in context for people, they had 118 fourth downs last year that were within 2 touchdowns. That's fourth downs out of 135 on the season. So that's 17 fourth downs where they weren't either winning or losing by more than 14 points. And in those 118 fourth downs, they went for it 5 times. 5 times. 5 times. Is awesome. Just to compare that over their career, setting aside 2023, which was ridiculous, Christ went for it in his career 19% of the time, so 6% more. Fickle, 27% of the time. So these are similar numbers that we talked about last week, but just so people remember. So then the last one I kind of did that was from last week that I reconstructed was remember my 4th and 5 within 60 yards? Yeah, that whole thing, like, your prototypical one?
Yeah.
So he does a little better there. He actually does significantly better there. Over his career, Ferentz, he went for it 42% of the time. The highest was 57% of the time. in 27 in 17 and 18. The rest were kind of just a little bit under it, but not wildly under it. And then that compares favorably to Paul Chryst, who went for it 40% of the time. Notably, he's very conservative early in the career and gets better. And then isn't as favorable as Fickell, who went for it 2/3 of the time when you take in that criteria. So I looked at that and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But one nice thing when you do these studies and then you put them away for a while and you look at them again, you get fresh eyes. And I said, wait a minute, I want to look at this in a different way. Everybody's been calling for it. Guess what's back?
Toner.
He hasn't been on the show in like a month. I had like 4 people asking why Toner isn't on the show anymore. And Toner's on, which by the way...
I was going to say his brother was on right before we started recording.
I know. Well, and you know what? So everyone knows this. Toner is having a major issue with his black toner cartridge because the drum keeps getting messy. So I was trying to run it clean earlier, and I think that's why it's going off. Because I have learned, don't print anything within an hour of recording or the turbine fires up. And then all of a sudden we're like, in the wind tunnel here. Although
Still
maybe...
calm down.
Might be printing something. Maybe one of my kids is printing something here. I don't know what this is, but it is still going. Do you hear that? I mean, it is ripping.
Never do.
So you just knew from the way I reacted. Look, there's Toner.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow, good on you.
Guess who's back?
Here it is. He's still going. Are you gonna? There we go. We're done. All right. So, like I said, fresh eyes, because now we have fresh eyes and a fresh mind on this podcast after a 1-minute distraction here with a printer. So I said, well, I was doing this thing within 60 yards and within 4th and 5 or less. 4th and 4 or less. And I said, well, wait a minute. Maybe like on 4th and 2 at the 27-yard line, maybe you do want to kick, or maybe you do want to do this. And maybe that's going to be more affected by your kicker and other things. So like, what was a better barometer of, again, just aggression, not good or bad, but just aggression. And my thought was, I'm going to look at a smaller subset. So I said, let's look at 4th and 4 or less from the 38-yard line. So the opponent's 38, so plus 38, all the way back to your own 40. Figuring, okay, that's a 55-yard field goal or deeper, so back into punt territory, right? So it's like borderline kick, that's a tough college kick, no matter who the kicker is, and then into the punt range. And like, how do they compare there? Because maybe that tells us more of a story. And there I thought the results were interesting. Ferentz goes down to a 23% go rate. So his drops by 20 points when you slide back into that criteria. Chryst only drops 8% to 32%. And then Fickell drops from 66 to 49% go rate. So what's interesting is a lot of these guys are much heavier going closer to the goal line. Like, I mean, Fickell and Ferentz are actually a little bit more aligned just in terms of, obviously, Fickell is just more aggressive overall, but where they're aggressive aligns a little bit more. Like, they're much more aggressive closer to the goal line when they're saying, okay, we've got field position, whereas Chryst is kind of the same guy no matter where he is. Like, the drop-off isn't as severe. And that one was the only one that kind of caught my eye because there wasn't as much of a change. But in the end, what does this tell us? We just did 15 minutes on Kirk Ferentz and punting. It tells us what we think, right? I mean, it tells us that Paul Chryst is a little more aggressive than Kirk Ferentz overall, but not crazily more. Crazily? Yeah, we'll just say that.
No.
But Fickell is definitely, on the aggregate over his career, a little more likely to go.
Well, and that 2018 offense was the one with Hawkinson and Noah Fant.
Mm-hmm.
It also had Amir Smith-Marset, who is still in the NFL. I don't know if you remember him. He was a returner, wide receiver.
Yeah. No, I remember him.
Yeah. So there's that. They had a pretty decent kicker in Miguel Rosinos. I'm trying to think because I forgot who the guy they had who was a Groza finalist maybe 2-3 years ago. Because if you got a kicker, it'll change it'll change this stuff, right? So what made me look at that, I wanted to confirm for 2018, but then I wanted to look at, I didn't look at this when we were talking before. There is only, out of all the attempts in 41 or in 2018, out of all the attempts that happened, only 2 of them didn't wind up in a scoring drive. And one of them, the drive ended up on downs. Doesn't say end of game or end of half. The other one says downs TD. I don't know what that necessarily means. I don't know if that was the other team took it over on downs and scored touchdown. I don't know.
Good question.
But it's all touchdowns and then 3 field goals.
Interesting.
So so not only was it, they went for it a lot. It was effective almost every time. The other thing is, especially the thing with Chris, who are these people that thought hiring Paul Chryst as an offensive coordinator for Iowa was a good idea, at least in terms of style?
I actually think they would, the offense would make sense. The style of offense would fit. I mean, but also he wouldn't be making those decisions. So that part I think doesn't matter, right?
I think it does. No, I think you're right. It's just interesting because when you look at these, I don't think there's that much difference between Chryst and Ferentz.
No, that I don't think was the argument.
Yeah, I don't think it was either. But but this bears it out.
I think the argument for Chryst was he runs an offense that is stylistically very much akin to what Iowa has done forever. It's plug and play, right?
Yeah.
I think that was the argument.
And the only reason I say that because it would have been a fit, but he doesn't make the decisions. I guess my point in bringing that up was if they did that, it would absolutely be, quote, more of the same.
Yeah. Well, I think the argument was people weren't so much pushing back against the style of offense because it does produce a lot of NFL football players. It was the execution of said style. And the idea would be he would elevate the execution, I think was the argument. Anyways.
All right.
Enough Kirk Ferentz on a Wisconsin podcast. So got a couple emails wanted to go through as well over the past few weeks. This one I just thought was funny because emailing a college football podcast run by a couple middle-aged dudes about craft beer, I thought was the most on-the-nose stereotypical thing we could possibly do. But I did want to acknowledge Tez for the email who pointed out that they're probably making Varsity Golden Ale an ale because it's cheap to make.
I think that was an interesting point. And after that whole thing happened, I talked to my brother, who... For those who know, and I say this is like he knows a thing or two about beer. And if anybody wants to talk to me offline, that not only is the ale, it's cheaper to make, it actually has like more broad appeal.
Yeah, there you go.
Believe it or not, like as opposed to a lager or pilsner. Yeah.
There's our answer. All right, we can't do this anymore, Max, or we're gonna grow one of those IPA beards like in the middle of the conversation.
You beat me to the punch because I was just gonna say neither of us wear facial hair. So I can barely grow it. So I can, but it looks terrible. So
we need to get the gauge earrings. You can have the gauge earring jokes.
Oh, gosh. No. All right. That's not my style, man.
And then the other email we got was from Jonathan in Austin. Actually, Max, why don't you read it? Because I need to open my scholarship count while we get this, because that's part of my thought on it.
All right. Jonathan in Austin says, like others, I really enjoyed the fourth down discussion in episode 315, but I actually had a question regarding your recruiting discussion. What do you think the Badgers do if they miss out on Byron Lewis at running back? Do you really think they won't take a plan B guy?
So this is from 315. We talked about it, and you and I mean, we did pretty much agree, like they're going for an A-list guy and they're probably going to be pretty picky, right?
Yeah. And they don't need a plan B guy in this class.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I still would agree. I think here's my thing. I think if they end up offering somebody, like let's look at this class. After this year, you lose Malusi, you lose Tawee Walker, so you lose your 1 and your 2. You're left with, assuming no transfers right now, let's just do that. Cade Giacomelli is going to be a junior, right? 2 years remaining. Jackson Aker will be in his final year. Nate White will be a third year, redshirt sophomore. And then you have the 3 freshmen. My thinking is right now and then through the summer into the fall, when they're doing their version of OTAs right now, where they're supposedly not there, but all the players are there. And
I know. I feel like it's been different now, but yes, their version of OTAs.
Yeah.
It seems different nowadays. Anyway.
Well, they're allowed to have contact in the summer. They're just not allowed to have organized practices. But, every once in a while, it's like one of those things where, you remember when they used to record Gary Anderson did it with Dave Aranda came up with it when Anderson was the coach. And like they would basically make like PowerPoint presentations with video in it that they'd narrate about like, here's what I want you to practice. And that got around the rule. I remember there being a whole, I remember this whole discussion, but I think they do a lot of that stuff where it's very, very, very organized. Let's just say
see, that all depends on what you mean by organized.
Exactly. So I think over the course of the summer and even into fall camp, like I think we're going to have an idea of them knowing what they have. And if they don't think one of the 3 young guys is going to be a big piece, then I think you see a plan B guy offered. Like if they don't think one of those 3 young guys is ready to go for next year, then they're looking at a plan B. I think what's more likely to happen is you're going to have another grad transfer running back next year because you're going to need a complement / say, like a safety valve there. And, that's either Yakimelli or Aker or a combination of both, depending on how they feel about them. But I think that's more what you're likely to see is you may also see, if you ask me, I don't mean this in a mean way, but like if one of the older guys like Yakimelli, Aker, or White puts their name in the portal pretty early, like, in August or September, which happens, where they're like, I'm gone now, let's get my name in the portal. I think that's a really good sign that one of these 3 young guys is good. So I think they only offer, to me, a plan B guy if these 3 guys are there and they feel like, oh, maybe we don't have what we thought we had there.
I think that makes that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think we looked at it that way before. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because they're still going to have next year they're going to have 6 scholarship running backs as it stands for next year already, without another body coming in. And again, if they bring in a grad guy, that puts you at 7 without any attrition of any kind, which I think after this year, there'll be attrition, but it will be interesting to see. But I think that's the more likely scenario you see. If you see a plan B offered, I think it tells you more about what they have than what they want to get. And then we touched on this last week, and I just thought it was, because it kind of rounds out the June visits. I think we're kind of at the end of it, save for the one offensive lineman, the Hardy Watts guy they're waiting on. And I guess Trey Poteet today, but I don't think they're getting Trey Poteet in the next couple hours. It's Tuesday.
Is he announcing today?
Yeah, he's announcing in 2 hours.
That. Yeah, I haven't felt confident about that one in a while. And I was looking in the prep here too. I don't know if there's anything coming up on said Byron Lewis either, but I know I think most people have him as a Florida State guy.
Oh, Byron Lewis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and I just see that from the stuff today.
So the Badgers, I guess you could say, continue recruiting success in a sense that they got Nick Clayton, another one of their June guys. The interesting one was Raheem Stroud.
Yeah, I know.
Hardly knew ye.
Yeah, I know.
What I thought was interesting, I almost missed it yesterday. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon. He flipped to UCF yesterday, kind of like really quickly and boom. And it wasn't really talked about very much. That was the only thing that sort of caught my attention was out he goes.
I think that maybe the folks who cover that maybe knew that it was a soft kind of commit or something. Maybe I don't know.
I know, but it barely even made it. I mean, I almost scrolled by it. I mean, it was to that degree how little it was mentioned or covered. I just thought it just was so interesting. The guy in 2 weeks, my assumption, I don't know, he was waiting for it because he's from Tampa and UCF is what? Tampa to Orlando is an hour and
the war on I-4.
Yeah, it's not that far. So I guess he's close to home. But I just thought that was kind of interesting that nobody really talked about it much. But a weird flip, I have to admit. You can say
well, especially when you look at the rest of his offers too.
And again, it's home or like an NIL thing, but it just was a funny one to me that quick after committing, he's gone. But whatever. I think that's more common now than it used to be. And like a lot of people, you don't really get super invested in it. For all we know, he may be back in 2 months. So TBD.
You don't think he's like Cody Haddad?
That this was the dream offer?
And he's home? and he may come back?
Could do that. And then the only other thing that I thought was really interesting news-wise this week was the panic that ensued in like a certain corner of Badger social media when it was announced that the Badgers were looking for a new director of player personnel, and a bunch of online Badger bros lost their minds because they thought Max Steinecker was leaving. But in fact, he's not. He's getting promoted, and the Badgers were trying to poach Notre Dame's director of player personnel, who I assume they know from back in Cincinnati days, given the overlaps of the staff and all that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The only thing I thought was interesting about this, or I think the notable thing about this, is it tells me that they are expanding that staff.
Yeah.
Which means that they are
That's what I
invested.
was going to say too. Yeah. Right.
Because Max Steinecker, I mean, they're promoting him. His role is changing in some way, and they're bringing in another. It's not just like he's getting added responsibilities. It's he is layering over a person who's doing what he did before. So if you're a Badger fan and you're trying to like, hey, I am not the most positive guy on this podcast. It is well known. But if you want to make a case for, hey, it looks like they're trying to take this thing seriously, yada, 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 they're expanding.
This is good. That's a good news. That's a good news item.
Expanding that office. The only other thing I'm going to say, and I know I'm peeing in the wind, as they say, and there's no point in doing this, but Max Steinecker and Pat Lambert, they're going to leave one day. I promise you they're both going to leave one day. And I know this is a pointless thing to say, but it's going to happen. And when it happens, we don't need to be devastated. We don't need to be crushed. We don't need to talk about this being the end of Wisconsin recruiting and it's all coming down like a house of cards, because it's not. They will find another person to do that job. I know them. They're very, very good at their job. I'm sure of it. But just understand there are changes and things. These things happened, and they will find somebody else to do that job very, very well too. So bookmark this little section. Don't freak out in like 2 years or whatever. But I know that's a waste of my breath.
It isn't. It isn't. I think it's life in the big city, man. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and I want to say that it goes beyond. You shouldn't lament it. That's a good thing.
Yes. Don't feel sad about the loss. Remember the happy times we had along the way.
Do you remember in the early days of the Buck Around when how much conversation did we have about coaching turnover
and salaries?
And salaries and all that stuff. But every one of those guys got like promoted.
I know.
They went to better places, which that's life in the big city. Do you think Alabama fans sat around and go, oh, geez, we lost Sarkisian. I wonder who we're going to get.
Bill O'Brien's gone.
Oh, geez, we lost Bill O'Brien. I wonder who we're going to get.
Well, I don't think they sound like
You know what
that,
I mean?
Max. Just for the record, they don't sound like that.
No, not. Believe me, I know they don't sound like that.
but yeah.
some fans of the team, we discussed something.
Yes.
But you know what I mean? That's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. It means the people that you have currently are in demand. It's when your people sit around like maybe over at the school we were discussing earlier in this podcast for years and years and years and years. And there's a reason for that. And it's not just because of loyalty or they keep getting raises. Some of them do, but it's usually not why.
All right. We've beat that drum enough. I know people
I think so. That's our motivational speech.
Yeah. Chill out.
Yeah.
It's end of June. It's summertime. Go out and enjoy the sunshine.
And
Max,
go get your preview guide.
Go get your Phil Steele
preview guide season.
And enjoy it. By the way, side note, I don't want to start a whole nother conversation, but if people are looking for something, the Pick Six Previews PDF is pretty good. I get that.
Is it?
I did get it last year, and I liked it.
I know you did. You've always been a fan.
Well, I mean, not always. I got it for the first time last year. Max, you're speaking untruths here.
Felt like we've discussed that in the earlier days.
Last year we discussed.
No, not that early. Earlier than that.
All right.
Anyway,
on that
go
note,
get your preview guide.
Get your preview guides. We'll be coming back at you guys soon. Probably do some more team previews and little potpourris of news. Always want to hear your thoughts and questions. This is the time of year to get them in. They're good for that sort of 20-minute before the team preview or after the team preview section of the show. So we'd love to hear where we're wrong and right as well. And don't forget, we have that YouTube channel now. We're not going to plug it incessantly, but I figure mention it twice on the pod and we're good. Max, until the next time.
Until the next time.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.